Welcome to the Library of Humanity. Today, sorry I have a little bit of a cold, but I want to put out this video because it's about death, dying, and others in your life passing away. So this is one of the most serious spiritual and life subjects that you can talk about or think about. And actually, people don't talk about death very much because in our culture, the Western culture, of Christian background, is death is seen as a negative overall. The reason why it's seen as negative is because death is the termination or ending point of your ego or yourself. And of course, the nature or the errand of your ego is to continue surviving. And that's why it's seen as a negative. Now, death actually isn't meant to be feared because death is complete nothingness. So I want you to imagine when you are sleeping, in between your dreams, you're in dreamless sleep. Okay, that is what nothingness is. You can't remember what I'm talking about because it's just nothingness. Okay, there are no problems. It's actually the essence of nothingness is bliss or joy, but it's not like a human joy. It's a universe or universal or spiritual joy of just no problems at all. So that's what death is. Another way of thinking about death is that it actually doesn't exist, because death is just an idea that humans have. Most humans, 99% of us, have not experienced death. Some people have, though, had near-death experiences. However, I would argue that those are actually near-dying experiences, because they're often, it's at the cusp of your ego ending, and then they go on to this next realm. In the near-death experience, a lot of people explain that they go on to this next realm, and God or something or an angel asks you if you're ready. Now that is the entrance point to the complete death. Now that's in that midway point, that would be the dying, because you could easily return to life. Now people who have near-death experiences, of course, they all return to life, but obviously those who pass away go on towards the death part of this near-death limbo. Okay, so that is what death is really it doesn't exist, or it's that nothingness that we experience in dreamless sleep. So the really thing that we need to talk about, the big thing, is dying, because dying is the process of your ego ending. So that's where fear enters your heart and your awareness, and it overtakes your whole life in that moment is fear. So fear and dying are literally the same thing. Your ultimate fear is you dying. So fear is the biggest experience of fear is when you are dying, or if you have a near-death experience, is seeing how exactly you were constructed as an ego or a self. I saw exactly how I was constructed. All of these ideas, other people taught me. All these ideas of how me, Kyle, can survive in the world. And that was this process of like going to kindergarten, going to college, talking to family at Thanksgiving. All of these, I saw that these are all ideas and stories that were taught to me in order for my ego, Kyle, to survive. Okay. However, the mushrooms also showed me what it would be like to end. Okay, and not just me, but I actually saw what it would be like for all of like this universe or this physical realm would end. And I actually thought it was. I literally thought I saw that the universe was about to end, and I was preparing for it. In my soul, I was preparing for it. Okay. It didn't end up happening because once the universe was going to end, I saw it moving like this. Okay, I got to prepare. The universe is ending, but then it just snapped into like nothingness. And then I reemerged into the room in which I was, and my friends were there, and I asked them, "Did you do mushrooms too?" Because I had no idea what was going on, and I was like, what is this, right? I knew immediately, I remembered myself and what the situation was, but it took a second to really reintegrate into this living situation, right? This being a human being on Earth. If you have a near-death experience, I can imagine that's what it would be as well, similar to a deep psychedelic experience. Now that would be death and dying. I wrote something else about death and dying in my journal, And so this is where I'm trying to find the difference. There is a difference between death and dying. The dying process reminds us that we as the egos with experience suffering and ultimate termination. So it's a reminder that we will end. The process of birth and termination of the self is as natural as drinking water. We must not attach to the suffering nor the self, because they end. The suffering ends and the self ends. Dying is difficult for the ego because of the reminder that suffering is a natural occurrence of life. We don't want to remember suffering, and we kind of want to forget that it's a natural occurrence of life. The body is clumsy, the self is selfish. Love and consciousness is what gives us grace and a respite from this suffering. Okay, so the opposite of suffering is love with a small l and consciousness with a small c. Now prayer, deliberate prayer, contemplation and meditation upon the nature of this love and consciousness is what saves the souls from the horror and fear of the dying body. Okay, so if you are experiencing the process of dying, if you're near the end of your life, or if you are seeing your loved one entering that realm of ending, the body ending, then remember that prayer, contemplation, meditation, love, and consciousness is the opposite of dying. Now remember that death doesn't actually exist, so death you could also see is the same as existence. So nothing actually ends. You as consciousness and love, you continue forever. Now what ends is the body and the ego. Okay, so it's really important not to get attached to this ego or this body, because that ends. Now, it's fun to be a part of this life that you're in the meantime, right? Like right now, I'm almost 28. I'm in like the prime of life. It's great. I exercise, I meditate, I converse, I socialize, I travel, I shoot videos like this. I'm living my dream. Now, the important part, even though I'm having a really good life, is not to get attached to it because it's going to end. It's actually going to turn towards the worst because of the dying process. Right now I'm in the middle of this living process. But once I'm dying, now it's really important that I don't attach to the living or the good things in life too much, especially when it is so good. So even when it is good, what's tough is disattaching from the good life when you're living in the middle of it. Now, when you're dying or when you're in depression, it's pretty easy to let go of the good side of life because you're on kind of this negative side of life, right? The yin and the yang. If you're so much in the yin, then you forget about the yang. But of course, in order for there to be a yin, there needs to be a yang, right? In order for there to be mountains, there needs to be valleys. Okay, so that is the dying and death process. If you are experiencing others in your life ending, for example, I received a comment on a video from Kayla and Chloe's World. Now, this is about the idea of climate change and your children experiencing difficulty in life in the future and possible death and extinction due to climate change. The comment is, I'm not afraid of death because it doesn't exist. Or it's just nothingness, beautiful nothingness. But, quote, I'm afraid of the collapse and watching my kids die a slow and painful death. It won't be painless and immediate, that's for sure. Okay, so death is tough, right? It's painful, and it's not immediate. It goes on forever. It goes on for a while, excuse me. And so that's what makes it so difficult, is the pain and the suffering. But contemplate on its opposite, which is the love and the consciousness that I mentioned in my journal. Now, my response was, I was thinking about this at work during lunchtime. So my response is, quote, this is a very deep comment. I would say that there is no difference between the suffering you receive for your child's suffering and your love for them. You suffer because you love. This makes love even more powerful. Okay, so suffering and love is the same thing, ultimately. Or you can't have deep love without having suffering. That's the purpose of suffering, is that you can love more, right? If you never experience suffering, everything is just bland and white bread, right? But if you have really deep suffering, like if you eat something disgusting, the next time you have like a simple French fry, it just tastes amazing, right? And you love it. That's the same with suffering and love, or suffering and consciousness. Consciousness just feels so great if you've had like a deep depression like I had. Like when I was in high school, I had a really, really deep depression, and that brought me into loving life so deeply as I do now, and taking life seriously by studying philosophy, meditating, traveling, exploring the world, etc. Okay, so you suffer because you love. So that's the reason of suffering, is because you love. And then lastly, that's what makes love even more powerful, is through the suffering process. Okay, so that's most of the video. Again, in conclusion, death is blissful nothingness. Dying is really difficult, but if you contemplate and meditate upon its opposite, which is life, love, and consciousness, then you will be happier, or you won't attach to the dying nor the life. You just continue, and you see that life is nothingness, and that nothing is actually happening at all. That you see all these events in life, and actually it's just stories. Okay, ultimately, everything that you experience besides the nothingness itself is just stories. God is the same as nothingness. So really everything is just God. Everything is bliss with a capital B. Everything is nothingness. Anything else that you've, like plants behind me, the outdoors, me, even the moment, for example. All of this is just stories. Human beings, ultimately it's just stories. However, they're very, very important. So most people, that's all they experience is the stories, which is good, but it's also unfortunate, because the nothingness, the love, the thing that's always here, the non-thing that's always here, which is God or consciousness or bliss, that's ever present. And that's what gives life so much more meaning than all of the stories that we attach to throughout the human being's life. So that is something that we can contemplate and meditate upon. And like I mentioned in conclusion, that the purpose of suffering and dying is because it makes life much more beautiful and more powerful. Okay, so if you have any questions, comment below. If you like the video, click the like button. Excuse my cold, that's what makes my voice sound so weird. Stay tuned. Peace.